Picture yourself kneeling before the altar, heart laid bare, only to realize the very hands you trusted have fractured your innocence. I'm Veritas Vox, and today we strip away the stained glass facade to reveal the wolves hiding in holy robes. What does it mean when the sanctuary meant to protect you becomes the hunting ground for predators? How deep does this betrayal cut when those consecrated to heal instead wound and silence? Stay with me as we confront the darkest shadow lurking behind every sermon. Clerics ordained to guide souls wield immense authority, and with it comes the power to destroy trust. In Baltimore, survivors recount furtive calls for help ignored in dimly lit sacristies, while church officials exchanged whispered assurances to keep it in the family. A landmark grand jury inquiry peeled back decades of obfuscation. Hundreds of children betrayed, each story a shard of glass in the heart of the church. But their suffering was not a momentary lapse. It was baked into a system that prized reputation over redemption. Consider the parishioner who, as a child, clutched his rosary beads only to discover they stain crimson with fear. Or the mother who, after reporting her daughter's assault, was counseled to forgive and forget for the good of the flock. Behind every muted apology lies a question. How many voices were silenced by polite nods, by threats of scandal, by the weight of an institution more concerned with image than justice? These broken vows echo across confessionals and council rooms, where bishops once deliberated not on healing the wounded, but on quelling headlines. They moved offenders silently, like infected tissue passed from body to body, never once alerting the communities at risk. And as each predator relocated, the chorus of betrayal grew louder, demanding we ask, can we ever trust doctrine when its guardians betray their most sacred promise? This betrayal did not respect denominational borders. From Catholic cathedrals to Baptist chapels, the unholy pattern repeats: fiduciary loyalty, traded for confidentiality, spiritual leadership for cover-ups. In Pennsylvania, thousands of pages detailed more than 300 offending priests, yet each redaction felt like another brick in the wall of silence. Meanwhile, the world's largest Protestant convention confessed to secretly tracking 700 accused ministers, dispatching them to new pulpits without a word to the very flocks they were meant to shepherd. Imagine the collective damage. Entire congregations left to grapple with the horror of knowing your Sunday comfort was presided over by a wolf in shepherd's clothing. Donations continued, attendance held steady, while the victim count rose, unseen, unspoken, untallied. When loyalty to the institution eclipses loyalty to the innocent, the Church abandons its own foundation, love and protection. What toll does this silent pact extract from our collective soul? Generations carry inherited trauma, family lines fractured by whispered truths. Faith itself teeters on the brink, believers torn between devotion and disillusionment. Faces in the pews now ask not, "Is there a God?" but, "Can I trust those who claim to speak for him?" No wound cuts deeper than the one inflicted by a trusted guardian. Survivors describe a spiritual devastation that rivals the physical pain, an inner world shattered by the same hands that once offered blessing. Many speak of nights haunted by confessions they dared not utter, of prayers that once soothed now echoing with betrayal. Anxiety coils around their thoughts like a serpent. Depression drapes over their days like a funeral shroud. Some lose the very language of faith. The words Lord and Father become triggers, each utterance reopening a raw, ragged scar. One survivor recalls, I could no longer kneel in church without my legs trembling. I felt the floor itself might swallow me alive. Others report dissociative episodes, slipping into a trance mid-sermon, reliving the assault in vivid detail as though time itself has fractured. Trust, once a sacred bridge between human and divine, collapses into rubble. Survivors carry an unspoken question in every breath. If the vessel of God's love can harbor such darkness, where does one seek refuge? This is the aftermath no homily addresses. A soul unmoored, forever scanning faces for the flicker of predatory intent. When a victim confesses their pain, they often meet cold shoulders rather than open hearts. Families desperate to preserve their reputation urge silence. Congregations, fearful of scandal, whisper that forgiveness means forgetting. Spiritual mentors, conflicted between loyalty to the institution and duty to the wounded, too often choose the safer path, silence. This code of hush stitches a new wound. Isolation. Survivors become pariahs in the very community meant to embrace them. I felt exiled, says one former parishioner. They told me to keep this between us, but in doing so, they locked me out of their compassion. Without acknowledgement, pain festers. Without validation, healing stalls. And yet in that silence, a darker conspiracy blooms. The illusion of normalcy. Worship services continue. Choir hymns swell, offering a veneer of unity. Beneath that veneer, trauma accumulates like a hidden graveyard. Each victim's story, a ghost haunting the pews. The sanctuary lives on, untouched, untarnished, while the human cost is swept into shadow. Power in the church is less about shepherding souls and more about safeguarding the institution. Behind ornate pulpits and polished seminaries lies a network of alliances, bishops, diocesan councils, legal teams, dedicated first to protecting assets, then reputations, last of all victims. When whistleblowers emerge, they face more than indifference. They confront the full force of canonical procedures, weaponized to stifle truth. Consider the tribunal that expelled a brave priest for bringing scandal after he demanded accountability, while his superiors quietly reassigned the real offender. Or the diocesan lawyer who counseled payment of hush money rather than a public confession, calculating that a quiet settlement cost less than the uproar of a scandal. These are not isolated decisions but a cultural reflex. Silence as strategy, secrecy as sanctuary. This institutional armor extends globally. Money flows from wealthy parishes to defense funds. Scandals are managed behind closed doors. Sympathetic media narratives are seeded to recast perpetrators as fallen men seeking redemption. Meanwhile, victims linger in limbo. Statistics on internal spreadsheets, not faces in pews. When preservation eclipses protection, the church becomes an empire of complicity, bound by the very vows meant to uphold its holiness. When the guardians of faith betray their flock, the damage transcends physical and psychological wounds. It fractures belief itself. Believers ask, if the institution that claims to channel divine love is tainted by sin, where does God abide? For some, faith becomes a relic, dusty, inert, locked away, lest it shatter against reality. Others drift into agnosticism or atheism, convinced that all ecclesial claims are tainted by human corruption. Communities fracture as congregants choose sides. Some cling to tradition, demanding forgiveness at any cost. Others demand reckoning, ready to dismantle every altar. Families splinter, friendships dissolve, marriages strain under the weight of unspoken doubts. A once unified body of Christ becomes a battleground of suspicion and blame. Yet perhaps the greatest cost is spiritual cynicism, the slow erosion of wonder, the dulling of prayer, the faint echo of hymns in empty hearts. Trust, once an unspoken covenant between believer and divine, is replaced by legal waivers and background checks for those who serve. When faith itself is questioned, the soul stands at a crossroads. Abandon the journey, or rebuild belief from its shattered shards. When churches once venerated as moral compasses collapse under scandal, the ripple reaches every corner of society. Nations once bound by shared hymns now question the very role of faith in public life. Surveys in Europe and North America reveal steep declines in church attendance and growing distrust toward religious institutions. Many see them as relics of hypocrisy, rather than beacons of hope. In regions where churches once led social programs, funding dries up, partnerships fracture, and entire communities lose a vital support network. The church's moral capital, its unspoken currency, devalues with every headline of betrayal, leaving believers and skeptics alike wondering whether any sacred institution can still claim authority. In our digital age, every confession and cover-up finds a second life online. Victims tweet snippets of their trauma. Influencers dissect leaked documents on live stream. Yet the same platforms that elevate voices can also bury them beneath trending hashtags and algorithmic noise. A viral exposé sparks outrage and then vanishes into the next scandal. Meanwhile, deepfake clips and conspiracy threads muddy the waters, casting doubt on survivors' testimonies. As echo chambers form, some communities rally for reform, while others retreat into defensive denial. The global church now stands on a precarious stage, its reputation playing out in news feeds and notifications, where truth competes with sensationalism and justice fights for airtime. For decades, the church relied on internal tribunals, ecclesiastical tribunals shielded by canon law, to adjudicate allegations in secret. Yet, as civil authorities cracked open sealed archives, survivors brought priests to lay judges, juries, and judges unbound by redactions. Landmark trials in Philadelphia and Boston saw once untouchable monsignors and auxiliary bishops compelled to testify under oath, their whispered reassurances laid bare by cross-examination. These proceedings exposed more than individual crimes. They revealed institutional patterns of deception, missing files, altered statements, and diocesan lawyers coaching witnesses to minimize reputational damage. Though some abusers finally faced prison time, many statutes of limitation had long since expired, leaving survivors to confront a grim calculus: truth without trial, testimony without consequence. Civil settlements ballooned into the hundreds of millions, dioceses liquidating assets, selling seminaries, and mortgaging cathedrals just to compensate victims. Yet financial redress became a double-edged sword. Executives touted generous settlements as proof of contrition, while some parishes quietly raised new funds to replenish legal reserves. Critics argue that dollar amounts, however vast, can never atone for stolen childhoods. Moreover, the specter of bankruptcy declarations forced entire dioceses into bankruptcy court, restructuring under court-mandated oversight and open record requirements. In these rare instances, transparency became the price of survival. Churches learned that hiding scandals risked institutional collapse, while public accountability could catalyze genuine reform. Silenced for years by gag orders and pastoral pleas, survivors have transformed personal trauma into collective power. Grassroots organizations, such as SNAP, Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, and Voice of the Faithful, demand independent review boards, lay oversight, and survivor representation in bishop appointments. They lobby legislatures to abolish criminal reporting time bars, author child victims acts, and create clergy reporting hotlines that bypass diocesan offices. Their rallies in front of cathedrals and social media campaigns have shattered the illusion that the faithful must simply forgive and forget. Survivors also harness art, literature, and public testimony to reclaim narrative control. Memoirs, documentaries, podcasts, and survivor-led liturgies bear witness to trauma and resilience. These platforms invert the ancient paradigm. No longer are victims confined to confessional shadows. Instead, their voices echo in civic halls, university lecture series, and city council chambers. Through united advocacy, they force faith communities to confront uncomfortable truths, that accountability cannot reside solely in victim forgiveness, and that healing requires structural change rather than pastoral platitudes. For centuries, canon law functioned as the Church's hidden judiciary, internal courts where bishops judged their own. Allegations against clergy were fast-tracked into archives, not indictments. Files sealed under the seal of confession. Evidence left unexamined. Yet mounting public outrage forced a reckoning. In the wake of global scandals, the Vatican issued Vos Estis Lux Mundi, a motu proprio mandating external reporting channels and penalties for clerical cover-ups. Pope Francis created a new tribunal for bishops who shield abusers and laid groundwork for lay-led review boards. But institutional inertia runs deep. Implementation varies wildly. Some dioceses appoint truly independent panels, while others staff them with retired clergy and canon lawyers, eyes wide shut to the structural rot. Critics argue that without enforceable penalties and genuine lay participation, reform becomes a facade. The same old code, repackaged in new letterhead. The question lingers. Can a system built on clerical privilege truly police itself, or are these gestures mere balm on festering wounds? Christianity preaches radical forgiveness, to turn the other cheek, to forgive 70 times 7. Yet when applied to institutional abuse, this doctrine can become a double bind, an unspoken mandate to forget the offender, rather than pursue justice for the victim. Congregations urge survivors to let go and let God, framing forgiveness as the height of faith, while the same discourse absolves leadership of accountability. Survivors recount the agony of pressured absolution, the pastor's gentle reminder that unforgiveness seeds bitterness, the well-meaning parishioner's insistence that forgiving a predator is God's will. But true mercy demands truth-telling and consequences. Without them, forgiveness risks becoming complicity, a spiritual SOP that silences grief and shields abusers. The paradox crystallizes. Can one honor the call to forgive without erasing the imperative to protect? When local accountability falters, survivors and advocates have forged global pacts to guard the vulnerable. The Council of Europe's Committee on the Prevention of Sexual Abuse published binding guidelines urging member states to require mandatory reporting of clerical abuse, while the Anglican Communion's Safeguarding Network unites provinces across continents in shared standards and victim-centered protocols. These alliances declare no confession is above the law, no diocese above humane oversight. Yet even as governments and churches sign declarations, many clauses remain aspirational, promises inked on paper, but unmet in parish archives. the paradox endures. Can a faith that knows no borders truly protect its flock without surrendering a measure of sovereignty? Beyond institutional reforms, grassroots movements have become the Church's conscience. Survivor-led networks like End Clergy Abuse and international NGOs, such as Human Rights Watch, leverage cross-border testimony, open-source databases, and public petitions to demand full disclosure of abuse records. In Spain, an online map plots accused clergy by diocese. In Australia, public hearings have forced bishops to testify under oath. These digital tools transform whispers into data, grief into collective power. Yet the same platforms that illuminate dark secrets can also fracture communities. Doxing, conspiracy theories, and factionalism threaten to replace one form of silence with another. The cacophony of conflicting narratives. At the end of this harrowing journey, we face the abyss carved by betrayal. No sanctified ritual can mask the stench of hidden crimes. No eloquent homily can restore innocence stolen behind closed doors. Yet to ignore this darkness is to consent to its survival. True faith demands inspection of its every wound, as a surgeon must gaze into the wound before stitching. This is the moment of reckoning, when congregations, leaders, and each of us must look unflinchingly at the abyss, naming the predators by name, dismantling the systems that protected them, and refusing to let sacred spaces become silent killers of trust. But from that confrontation springs possibility. When survivors speak, truth becomes the mortar for rebuilt foundations. When communities demand transparency, secrecy loses its power. And when each believer holds doctrine and leader to the light, faith transforms from inherited creed into living conviction. Personal resurrection isn't a miracle performed by another. It is the hard-won rebirth of your own spirit. You reclaim the altar within by refusing to bow before false shepherds and by carrying the ember of truth into every aspect of your life. In this way, the collapse of broken institutions can kindle a fiercer, more authentic devotion, one rooted not in flawless structures but in unwavering integrity. I am Veritas Vox. Let this reckoning be your call to vigilance and your invitation to true renewal. Do not fear the wounds of faith. They are the crucible in which authenticity is forged. Stand steadfast, demand transparency, and carry this ember of truth into the world. Only then will the Church in your own spirit rise anew.